Oh, are we working? Oh, oh, there I am. Hello. Good morning. Let's fix this chat box here. Okay. Yes. Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome to my wonderful Elizabethan garden. I hope that you will enjoy your stay. Should be all right. It's quite nice. Hey, Amy. Good to see you. Yeah, I'm very good, thank you. Quite chilled out in my Elizabethan garden. It's quite nice. Yeah, how are you? I should ask. Oh, hang on. We have a philosophical question from Magnus. If Duncan Rhodes and Nick Baton had a fight, who do you think is going to come out on top? What? I mean, have you seen them both? Obviously, Nick Baton. I mean, that doesn't mean I support him. It's just, come on, that's physics. Yeah, he's tall. That's right. Thanks, Magnus. Good. I'm glad you're good, Amy. So yeah, today we're going to be exploring some philosophy from a philosopher. I mean, not much of a shock, is it? But we're going to be looking at Francis Bacon, which is why I am in my Elizabethan garden. I like to think he would have wandered around here. This is Hampton Court. So there's definitely the potential that he would have wandered around here. He probably met up with old Queen Bess here and, I don't know, smelled the flowers. So we'll bring up the screen. Good morning, those just coming in. Hello. Where's my window? Here he is. Hey, look at that. It's Francis Bacon, 1561 to 1626. And we can tell just from his little portrait here. Hey, Henry, good to see you. We can tell that he's definitely Elizabethan because he's looking a bit rough. You see what I did there? Because he's got a ruff. No, not great. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at a little bit of the background of Francis Bacon, see where he came from and what sort of man he was in general. Then we're going to have a look at his views on nature. And then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of philosophical reasoning. We're going to look at inductive reasoning, deductive reasoning, and the sort of differences between the two is the plan. And we'll, of course, we'll see which side of that inductive, deductive argument Mr. Bacon comes down on. We're then going to look at his views of God and philosophy and how they connect. And then we'll wrap it up with his claim, or the claim that some people give him, as the father of empiricism, which is a big claim, but yeah, we'll see how that goes. Yeah. All right. So hang on, let me just check. Is everything? Yeah, we're good. All right. We'll start off with a little bit of the background of our Elizabethan genius. So Francis Bacon, this guy with the ruff, he comes from, well, he's very, very English. Yes. He comes from a very noble family. His father has jobs within the Elizabethan government. So he's not, he's not a poor boy. He's not a commoner. He's definitely starting from a position of great privilege within society. And we've got two little portraits of him here. One of him in his early life, where he seems to have way too much neck, and one in his later life when he's looking, well, I don't know. I quite like these portraits, how the younger one, he looks very sort of, I don't know, what's the word to describe it? He looks quite confident, maybe we'll say. And in the older picture, he looks a little bit more, meh, perhaps. Yeah. But Francis Bacon, he grows up very privileged, but he's also suffers from a lot of health complaints. He's not a very healthy fellow. And because of that, he can't go to school. Yeah, his health gets in the way. Very sad. And so he's homeschooled, which is something that we'll all be familiar with. So he's schooled at home by his parents to some extent, but I think mainly tutors are coming in and sort of teaching him in his private home. And he's known to be incredibly intelligent. Like, that's what everyone says. He's just, he's naturally very intelligent. He is a voracious reader. He's constantly reading everything that he can find. Texts about, well, philosophy, about poetry, about science. I'm not sure, Magnus, if that's right. I'm not sure. Yeah. Hey, Clement Gilly, good to see you. Don't worry, you haven't missed much. We're just sort of getting into it. It's all right. So yeah, he's reading every book that he can read, and he kind of doesn't have to. It's not like the only way in life for a nobleman is to become very learned and wise and read a lot, but that's what he likes to do. So there you go. Yeah, Magnus. I don't know if that. Yeah. Okay. So he has 3 goals in life at this younger age. One is to uncover the truth. That's what he's interested in. He wants to know what the truth is. Now, in some ways, he already kind of has a certain angle on truth because he's very, very religious all his life. It's something that never really changes with him. He is an Anglican, which means that he's a Protestant English fellow. Anglicanism is a sort of thread of Christianity, I suppose, that combines a lot of the Protestant and Catholic ideas. So it's like Protestant base with some of the Catholic rituals and rites put on top of it. But that's not enough for him. He doesn't just want to sort of, I don't know, take in religious truth from the Bible or whatever, or the priests. He wants to uncover the truth of science in particular, because we're entering into the age of enlightenment here, and he's kind of a forerunner of that. His second goal in life is to serve his country, the great England. And, this is probably stems from his ideas of England being something special and something worth, protecting and looking after. But also, I think it speaks about his political and sort of class upbringing, because he's always, from a very young age, he's hobnobbing with the Queen. And in fact, the Queen, this is Elizabeth I, her with the big ginger wig, she thinks when she meets him as just a teenager that he's a genius. She kind of says, wow, you are very precocious and very intelligent. And so she kind of keeps an eye on him and is really quite a good friend of his throughout his life. And he's a very loyal subject to her. So if he wants to protect the Queen, then he's also protecting his country, and vice versa, I suppose. And his third goal, and I don't think these are in any particular order. I don't think he's like uncovering the truth is the most important thing, but I'm not sure. But his third goal is to serve God in, the God of Anglican Christianity that he believes in, doing the right thing based on God and his commands. So all in all, that's quite I don't know if you guys, do you have any life goals? And if you do they match these 3? My life goals have always been a little bit smaller than this, perhaps. Any life goals there in the chat? It's a good age that you are currently to come up with a life goal. Maybe like, I don't know, serving God forever. I don't know. No. Acting, new singing. Acting, new singing. Acting and singing. Oh, that makes more sense. Okay, so Clement Gilly are going for the, a life of creativity and artistic endeavor. That's quite a good goal. I like that. Yeah. These goals to us, I don't know, they seem a bit old-fashioned, and I suppose they are, because, well, we're talking about an earlier period in history here. But I would be interested to see if you went out on the street and you asked people, what's important, and you gave them these 3 options. I suspect that serve England and serve God wouldn't be quite so popular with the general public, but I might be wrong. Whereas uncovering the truth is something that we are very interested in today. We're very interested in a world of mass media and fake news and all that kind of stuff. Uncovering the truth does seem to be something that people are interested in. But I think Bacon is talking about uncovering the truth more in terms of science than maybe cultural ideas, which is perhaps what we're talking about now, or political truth. He's looking for a way to be certain of things in the natural world. So that brings us to, it's all in nature. Laura's life goal is to sleep. I don't know. I think, I mean, I respect your life goal, of course. But maybe may I suggest that there is more to life than sleeping? I don't know, I might be wrong. Maybe sleep is the secret. But yeah, I suspect there's more to life than sleeping. And Francis Bacon certainly did. Okay, your goal is to live to 89. That's very specific. Is there a reason 89? I mean, why not go for the round 90? Or is that just too much? You're like, nah, 90 is too far. Okay, we've got another one here. I'm just going to check I can actually read it out loud. Oh, no, I can't read that one out loud. Magnus, I think you'll find that your life goal there is actually evil. So maybe change it. Yeah. Kind of regretting asking now after that. So it's all in nature. That's where, if his goal is to find the truth, uncover the truth, then his first port of call is joking, probably. His first port of call for discovering truth is going to be looking at nature. And this does connect with his religious ideas. There's a basic philosophy or faith or whatever we want to call it with Francis Bacon that he's got a certainty that God has made the universe, including our planet and everything on it. So if you want to find out the truth, then the first thing to do, logically-ish to him, is to look at nature, study what you can find there, whether you're looking at trees or movement of water or the migration of birds or whatever it is, and you can find the truth through that. God has given us the clues or the data, and it's up for us to work with that by observing it, by looking at things, which I know it doesn't sound massively sort of groundbreaking to us, because, well, that's kind of how the scientific method has evolved. But Francis Bacon is at the start of all that. He's, before him, philosophy has largely, and I'm talking all the way back to the Greeks, philosophy has largely been about sort of rational thought. Whereas Bacon is saying, look, we need to get down to the facts, and the facts are there in the universe around us, and it's up to us to identify what those facts are. Which leads us to his idea, or I'm not sure if it's his idea, but his preferred method of knowledge, which is inductive reasoning. He thinks that this is the key. I mean, we've got a quote from him here. All learning and knowledge must be drawn from inductive reasoning. So in other words, anything that we're going to know and that we're going to say is a truth has to be drawn from inductive reasoning. So we'll break that down and we'll see what inductive reasoning is. So inductive reasoning starts from, and this fits with his idea that knowledge comes from the world, it starts from a specific observation. So something that we see in the world around us. So I might be looking around my lovely Tudor garden here, and I might say, well, most of these flowers are red. Yeah, that's a fair, specific observation. We then need to take that specific observation and we need to be able to find patterns in it. So we can see in my garden behind me that, yes, most of the flowers are red, but they're not actually all red, are they? There's orange ones, there's kind of purpley lavender down here. And then we can come to a general conclusion. So I cannot come to the general conclusion that flowers are red because I can see alternatives. It hasn't, I haven't been able to find that pattern. But we do have a few examples on the side of the screen here, which I'll zoom in on a little bit so that we can, maybe you can read them a little bit clearer. So we've got three examples here that sort of flow through. So our first one is a low-cost airline flight is delayed. Yeah, that's our specific observation. We're off on holiday. I don't know where we're going. Let's go to Ibiza. Yeah, why not? So we're at the airport. We've got our tickets to Ibiza in our hands, and we're waiting to get on the plane. And the voice comes over the tannoy. Bing bong. The flight to Ibiza will be delayed for 27 minutes. Thank you. Bing bong. I'm not sure why the tannoy has the same voice as the Queen, but it does. It's one of those weird things. So then we go on to observe a pattern. Yeah. Another 20 flights from low-cost airlines are delayed. So Francis Bacon, he's there. He's got his ticket to Ibiza. It's been delayed. He has a little further investigation and he sees that, there are actually 21 flights from low-cost airlines that have been delayed. And this leads him to a general conclusion. Yeah. Low-cost airlines always have delays. I mean, there's logic there, isn't it? And we're basing it on what we see, what we experience. You know, of the 21 flights that we looked at from low-cost airlines, they were all delayed. That must mean that all airlines have delays, or low-cost airlines, if that's what that. I don't know how you sort of work out what a low-cost airline is not, but there you go. We've got our second example here. Dogs A and B have fleas. So Bacon, there he is. He's got his two dogs with him. I don't know if he actually had dogs in real life. It's hard to tell. But he's got two dogs. They're both itching and scratching because they've both got fleas. That's a basic observation of the world around us. Yeah, we haven't had to sort of go outside of ourselves and think, I wonder if all dogs have fleas. No, we're starting with a really straightforward observation that we've made with our senses. Yeah, we can see the fleas on the dogs. I agree, Magnus. So we then go and observe a pattern. All observed dogs have fleas. So Francis goes out, he walks around the street, maybe he visits a friend's house and he finds X amount of dogs. And yes, they all have fleas. So our logical sort of conclusion from this, from our empirical data, which means data from our senses, means that all dogs have fleas. That's what you deduce, right? Yes, Magnus, again, I think you're getting the hang of this. Nice. Observation number 3. Elephants depend on water to exist. So I don't know what we're observing here. Maybe we're observing a oh, well, that's weird, Laura. No, Laura, that should be how it is. Yeah, so I can see your messages and you can see mine, but you shouldn't be able to. Oh, no, hang on, you should be able to see each other, shouldn't you? Try that. I think now you should all be able to see each other's messages. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. We'll see how it goes. So you won't be able to see the previous ones, Laura, because they would have been hidden away. But from now, there you go. Yeah, Clem and Gilly say hi, and you should be able to see that if it's working. Hey, there you go. Hey, Stacey. Yeah, you see an elephant. Maybe he sees an elephant that's away from water and it dies. That's what he's looking at. It's a strange scenario, but hey. So we then go on to our pattern. All observed elephants depend on water to exist. So maybe he's walking around Africa and he's seeing elephants drinking. He's seeing elephants in maybe desert areas that are dead or dying. And you go, okay, well, that first observation that I made seems to be true for all elephants. And so then we come to a general conclusion. All biological life depends on water to exist. Now, that might be a bit of a jump, but if we think of elephants as a representative of biological life, elephants share many characteristics with plants, animals, other living biological things, then we can come to that general conclusion that life is really dependent on water. You really go in for this one, Magnus, okay? Magnus, you seem to have a chip on your shoulder. I wonder, maybe something traumatic happened. I'm sorry if it did. very sad. So this is inductive reasoning, yeah? It all starts from empirical observation. We have to go out and look at something in the world. And of course, that's kind of the job of the scientist, is to go observe things and then take that away, see if there's a pattern. And if there is, you can reach a general conclusion. But this isn't the only type of reasoning there is. There are limits to inductive reasoning, which we'll discuss in a minute. But let's look at the flip side of inductive reasoning, perhaps, called deductive reasoning. Now, this is not what Francis Bacon is all about. Yeah, Francis Bacon is very much inductive. But here, when we think about deductive reasoning, we do it a little bit different. And this is perhaps going to be more familiar to us, because we live in a time of sort of scientific discovery and the scientific method. Then this might be more familiar to us. Anyway, so we start in this case with an existing theory, a theory that we want to either prove or disprove. We then move on to formulate a hypothesis. So we ask ourselves, this theory that we've either heard about or we've come up with ourselves, can we ask a question about it that will then lead to us finding truth? So once we've come up with a hypothesis, we've got an idea, we can then start collecting data. And that, again, can go back to empiricism, looking at the world around us. We then need to analyze that data. You can see I stole this from an American because it's spelled with a Z, but we analyze the data that we've collected. Then we're looking for, patterns or things that can prove or disprove. And then our last step is to either reject or support and keep our initial hypothesis. Now, that might sound like a load of mumbo jumbo. So we're going to, luckily, we've got here some examples of this process based on what we just saw. And hopefully we'll be able to see the difference here. So we start with an existing theory. So we start with scenario number one, that low-cost airlines always have delays. That's going to be our theory. We then need to formulate a hypothesis. So our hypothesis in this case is if passengers fly with a low-cost airline, then they will always experience delays. That's our theory that we're coming in with. Yeah, so we've started with that idea that low-cost airlines have delays, and we're now going to hypothesize that if you're flying low-cost, there will always be delays. That's our thing. We then go to collect data to try and either prove or disprove that theory. Yeah, we're going to try and, the way to do this properly would be to be completely unbiased. We're not just trying to find the information we want to find, we're trying to find the data that is as accurate as possible. So we would go to, the airport or the airliners, I don't know who keeps this data, but we would then find, their entire list of all their flights over the last, year, 6 months, whatever period. And we would see how many of those aircraft took off late. Yeah, assuming that the data, and this is an assumption, but assuming that that data is accurate, has been kept by the airlines or the airport or whoever's doing it accurately, then that's going to be, truth data based on empirical ideas. Yeah, okay, that would work, Magnus. Yeah, if you're trying to find out about Warhammer tournaments and certain players, then you would go and you'd look at the tournament data. That's right. So that's your hypothesis here, Magnus, that you've stated that certain players of the game are smelly could be collected by going and looking at tournament data and seeing how they're performing or whatever. So we've collected our data. Nowadays that would be a great big spreadsheet, I imagine, full of different plane times and stuff. But we would then go on and analyze that data. We've got the numbers, we've got the list of times, but then we actually analyze it, and we might find out that 5%, 5 out of 100 flights on these low-cost airlines are actually not delayed. So that suggests that 95% of them are, of course, but 5% of them are not delayed. So we've looked at all the data, the facts in front of us, and we can then decide whether we reject or support our initial hypothesis. So in this case, 5 out of 100 flights of low-cost airlines are not delayed, which means we have to reject that hypothesis. Our hypothesis that actually every plane is delayed. So we've learned now that our hypothesis is actually not true. Now, if in Francis Bacon's inductive reasoning, we come to the conclusion that actually all cheap cost airline flights are delayed. Yeah, well, that's what we've come up with, because the things that Francis Bacon observed himself with his eyes, and remember there were no planes back there, this is just an example, but because he'd see, I mean, in this case, 95 out of 100 flights were delayed. What if Francis Bacon just so happened, by chance, to have only looked at those 95? He hadn't noticed the other 5, you know, he wasn't there that day when they were taking off on time or whatever. Then he's come to a different conclusion about truth. With deductive reasoning, we've rejected this hypothesis that they're always late, whereas with Francis Bacon's inductive reasoning, we have come to the conclusion that they are always late. Maybe inductive reasoning isn't doing it for us. We'll go through the second example here. So all dogs have fleas is our theory that we're going to start with. Yeah, maybe we heard that from Francis Bacon as he complained about it in a pub. We then go and we make our hypothesis. All pet dogs in my apartment, in this example, so they're giving it they're not saying all dogs in the universe, but in this specific location have fleas in this building. We can then collect the data, and that would be quite straightforward. We need to round up all the dogs, and we need to, you know, search through their fur or look for signs of flea bites or whatever to decide whether all dogs do have fleas. We then analyze our data. So in this particular example, there are 20 dogs in the apartment building, and they've all been tested. We've checked every single one of them for the little flea blighters, and it turns out that only half of them have fleas, the other half don't. 10 out of 20 dogs don't have fleas. So again, we have to reject our hypothesis. Yeah, we've looked at 20 dogs. Yes, a lot of them do have fleas, but a lot of them don't. And that means that our hypothesis that all pet dogs in this area have fleas is actually wrong. So Magnus, to go back to your example there, if you're trying to find out how smelly people are, which is a strange sort of knowledge that you want to sort of find here, but you'd have to go around, you'd have to find every sort of person who fits the bill that you want, and you'd have to give them a good sniff to see if they are sniffing, if they are smelly. Yeah. So in both these two cases, we've come up with very different truths. Yeah. Using Francis Bacon's inductive reasoning, we have come to the conclusion that all dogs have fleas and that all low-cost airlines are delayed. But using deductive reasoning and actually going in and, you know, searching through the data has actually given us different ideas. Yeah. So our third one, though, all biological life depends on water to exist. That's our starting theory. You know, it's a basic assumption that we can make. We then formulate a hypothesis from that. All land mammals, making it a little bit more specific here, depend on water to exist. That would include elephants, of course. We then go around and we actually study all the land mammal species to see how they do with water. I mean, we could do kind of an evil, twisted reverse Noah in this case. We could collect up 2 of every mammal, land mammal. We could put them on a boat and not give them any water and see if any of them survive. That's a dark idea, but that's how we do it, I guess. So we then analyze the data. We go back to our boat after 6 months and we find not a single living mammal because they all need water to exist. So we find that all land mammal species do actually depend on water. Yeah. Even the yak, that poor dead yak on our boat, it needed water too. We then come to be able to support the hypothesis that we started out with. Yes, all land mammal species depend on water. So we've got 2 ways of arriving at some kind of truth. And they both seem to, in some cases, but not all, because our final case there about elephants and water, that seems to stack up whether we're doing inductive or deductive. Whereas The other two examples, they don't stand up. They don't end up with the same result. Okay. And then Magnus, yeah, I think, water. Magnus here has made the statement that some people could survive off Stella Artois, I think is what you're referring to there, in a pub, so they could just survive on lager. But of course, lager is mainly water. So that wouldn't disprove our hypothesis in that case. It would just suggest that, it's not so important where the water content comes from. I mean, I wouldn't try and survive off yucky lager, but I mean, you do you, I suppose. So that's our deductive reasoning. The big difference being that, we'll go for the positives of inductive first. So inductive reasoning, the positives here is that it's all based on specific observations. So we're not sitting around and formulating theoretical ideas just in our heads. We are going out into the world, into nature, and we are looking at things, we're observing things, we're noticing things. And then from there, we're looking for patterns. So if I'm walking along and I see a butterfly emerging from a cocoon, then I might say, wow, okay, I've just observed a butterfly coming out of a chrysalis. That's amazing. And then I might go around and I might start finding more chrysalises. And I might start, making a collection of them. And I'd test them and I'd observe them and I'd notice that, oh, look, Laura doesn't like the idea of going outdoors to look at chrysalises. Oh, well, we'll let Francis Bacon do it instead then. So we might notice that every single chrysalis we've got, eventually out emerges a butterfly. Yeah. I mean, that's probably what we'd find, right? And we can then come up with our general conclusion that all chrysalises end up producing butterflies. Yeah, it's nice and simple, and it's based on things that we can guarantee with our senses. But there are some downsides. What if our senses are not particularly reliable? What if we, have observed something and we're trying to find a pattern, and we kind of, I don't know, because we want a certain truth, we find the patterns that we want to find, if that makes sense. It's kind of, if I showed you a load of random dots or something and asked you to, say what you see, human beings, they tend to build patterns where there aren't any. We tend to look at, a collection of dots, or a cloud is a good example. You look at a cloud and people can say, well, that looks like a aeroplane, it looks like a horse, it looks like a smiley face, it looks a little bit like Donald Trump from behind, or whatever the cloud looks like. We're amazing at sort of putting patterns over things that have no real pattern. That's kind of what the human brain does. And if that's the case, then when we're doing inductive reasoning, we may find patterns which aren't actually based in truth, but are based in more of, our brains interpreting data falsely. That's an issue. Yeah, Magnus, you may have been a little bit harsh on those smelly people right there. It's not their fault they're smelly, okay? Maybe they just don't have any other choice, Yeah. So then that would lead us to general conclusions with inductive reasoning that are based on patterns that are false, and that's not a good place to be. But of course, remember, Bacon says all learning and knowledge must be drawn from inductive reasoning. That's what he wants. And I think part of the problem here is that our deductive reasoning is something which comes, a little bit later. So we could say, well, Francis, your basic idea of inductive reasoning is actually very good, but we can go further and we can, use deductive reasoning as well. Or we can assume that he just means that actually, no, inductive reasoning is the only form of reasoning that counts. We don't need external logic. We need to induct from the world around us, induce, I suppose I'd say. So let's look at the downsides of deductive reasoning. There's one glaring problem with deductive reasoning, and that is that it has to start with an existing theory that we build a hypothesis from. What if there is no existing theory? You need to actually have a theory to get going at all. So what if there are things in the world around us that we haven't come into meeting with yet? Yeah, we haven't observed them. Therefore, we haven't come up with a theory, and therefore we can't go on to formulate hypotheses. That's a problem. There are things in the world now that we know about, on a scientific or philosophical level, that Francis Bacon didn't. Francis Bacon couldn't have come up with a theory of, I don't know, the mating patterns of anglerfish. There wasn't anyone in the Tudor world that had ever, come into contact with an anglerfish or had any clue that they existed even. So they wouldn't have had that existing theory to therefore be able to go and formulate a hypothesis or collect data. So what Bacon is saying is, look, if we start from a point of, there's a thing, look at it, rather than, oh, here's an idea, let's think about it, and then go looking for it, then we're actually going to find out more. Yeah. And this ties in, I suppose, nicely with his Christian faith, his basic faith that actually what's going to be given to him is going to be given to him by God. So why does he see a flower or a chrysalis? Well, it's because God put it there, and therefore, that's a place to start trying to find truth, rather than trying to start with a theory about butterflies and then prove or disprove it. So I don't know. Do you guys have an opinion on whether inductive reasoning or deductive reasoning is better? We have radio silence. Do we think that Francis had it right? Start from a physical thing that we experience, or would it be better to start with a more of a theoretical approach and try and disprove it or prove it? Another problem with deductive reasoning, translate that into terms that you understand. Okay, yes and no. No. Okay, Magnus would like a Warhammer 40,000 example. Okay, so right, we're on an imperial backwater planet, Magnus, okay? And we find a witch. The witch is very clearly making people's head explode just by looking at them. It is a hard question, Amy, sorry. We then we then walk around the planet and we observe other witches also making people's heads explode. So that's inductive reasoning. From that, we can use our inductive reasoning and say that all witches make people's heads explode. Yeah. And then we deal with the witch problem. This is true. But with deductive reasoning, we would have to have an existing theory about witches exploding heads, which if I've not been to that planet and seen the witches exploding people's heads, then I wouldn't even be able to have that theory in the first place, right? So maybe we could build from an existing theory from someone else who has experienced this. So maybe inductive reasoning actually can lead to deductive reasoning in this case. But once assuming we can come up with a theory anyway that witches make people's heads explode, then we would have to go around. We'd have to visit multiple planets and find as many witches as possible. And we would have to, observe each one and say, has each one made someone's head explode? And the chances are that no, could we ever possibly observe enough? Could we ever observe every witch on every planet at every moment to see if they're making anyone's head pop? Probably not. So we're going to come up with maybe a data set. We're then going to analyze that. And if there's even one witch that we did not experience exploding other person's head, then we reject the hypothesis. And we can no longer say that witches make people's heads explode. Okay. Maybe that helps you, Magnus. I don't know. Maybe that's made the whole thing way more confusing. I tell you what, we'll come to our next bit, and then maybe this will help us understand. So here's Bacon's idea or thought about philosophy and how it connects to religion. And that might help us understand this here. And that's good. So Henry here says, deductive reasoning gives you the possibility to disprove your hypotheses. Inductive reasoning does not, because you can just observe the statistics that reflect your views. Now, this is true, Henry, but just to throw a little spanner in the works, one of the problems with deductive reasoning could be if somebody went out with the intention of proving or disproving a hypothesis, and therefore they could find patterns or they could find evidence to either prove or disprove, depending on what they want to do, and they might ignore other evidence. Yeah, now that's, you could argue that's doing deductive reasoning badly, but it does kind of, or it can skew towards one way or the other. Modern scientific method, generally, we're always aiming to disprove the hypothesis. That's the point. You come up with a hypothesis and you try your hardest to disprove it. And if you cannot, once you've put in all the effort you possibly can, if you cannot disprove it, then it must mean that the hypothesis has some basis in truth. But in Bacon's time, that wasn't perhaps what people were doing. They would come up with a hypothesis and they'd go and try and find everything they can to prove it. And they kind of ignore the stuff that is difficult, that doesn't help prove it. And that can lead us to possibly scientific problems. Whereas inductive reasoning, if you're basing it on just everything you've seen around you, if I'm looking at dogs for fleas and every single dog I see has fleas, then at least we've come up with a basic conclusion there, which seems to hold water. But it can't be perfect because we can never observe all the dogs at all time to see if they've all got fleas. Even if there's one dog in the world that doesn't have fleas, then that disproves our conclusion. So either way has its problems for sure. But this is, to go back to our quote here from Mr. Bacon on the screen, could he cook bacon? Yeah, probably. Yeah, I don't see why not. I mean, just because it's his name doesn't stop him being able to eat it. Eat your own name. So a little philosophy inclineth man's mind to atheism, which is the belief there is no God. So he's saying, look, if you're going to sort of jump into philosophy and you're going to have a cursory look around and you're going to sort of dabble in philosophy, then you might well come to the conclusion that there is no God. Yeah, because you might just sort of focus on the ideas of empiricism and what you can see and how it adds up, and you might decide, well, I can't see God, therefore God doesn't exist, right? Yeah, that would maybe no, it's slightly different there, Clement Gilly. Why is he called Bacon? That's just his surname. I don't know. His dad was called Bacon, so he is. I don't think it's like a sort of comment on his character or personality or anything. It's maybe his ancestors were pigs. He is part. You say he's a werepig, Clement Gilly. I don't think he's a werepig. To use his own argument, though, I mean, I have not observed Francis Bacon. I have only observed pictures of Francis Bacon, and every picture that I have observed of him shows him as fully human. So I can conclude from that actually Francis Bacon is not a pig, or even part pig. But of course, I haven't seen all the pictures. I haven't met him in real life. There might be a secret picture out there in someone's drawer that shows him with trotters and a snout. Yeah. But because I don't have that evidence, I'm going to have to come to the conclusion that he is not a pig man. Yeah. If we were going to do deductive reasoning on is Francis Bacon a pig man, we would have to start with our sort of existing theory. We'd have to say, well, okay, there is a theory that Francis Bacon is a pig man, yeah, a werepig, a pig boy, whatever we want to call him. We would then have to go and start with our hypothesis, that Francis Bacon is a werepig. We would then have to go and find as much data as possible. We'd have to try and find every bit of information, every written source, every painting that was made. We maybe even be able to exhume his bones and do some scientific tests on those, to see if he's a pig boy. And then at the end of that, we may, I suppose, have found some evidence that he is a werepig. But if we haven't, then we'd have to disprove that hypothesis and say, well, actually, Francis Bacon was a human man. And that's the end of the story. There ain't no pig DNA in that fella. Pigman sounds like a superhero. Yeah, it kind of does. Anyway, but then he goes on with his argument here. Yeah, depth in philosophy bringeth men's minds about to religion. So if we go into philosophy properly, and you may disagree with this, I mean, this is just his assertion here, but if we go into philosophy properly and we look deeper and deeper and deeper, then actually what we come up with is the idea that there must be a God. And in his case, a very specific, Anglican Christian version of God. Man, bear, pig. Nice. I like the addition of the bear there. Yeah. So if we kind of summarize his thoughts here, we can talk about arguments for existence of God. Yeah, so he says, look, if there's purely logical arguments, we can discuss those arguments, but actually we cannot know God himself through just logical arguments. It's not good enough. We can't, we could come up with our hypothesis that God exists. We could go out and collect data. We're not going to find much. Nothing that's concrete, perhaps, nothing that's not open to interpretation. Therefore, the only way that we can know God is to directly experience God. Now, religious people, especially from the Christian tradition, would call this touching the numinous, where you feel like you are actually in the physical presence. Maybe physical is the wrong word, that you are in the presence of the power of God. Yeah. So if you talk to religious people nowadays, there will be a certain percentage who believe, rightly or wrongly, that they have experienced God, with their senses. And that's how you build faith in God, not through logical arguments, because no logical argument will ever prove, inductively that God exists, because without that evidence, without empirical evidence of our senses, we cannot say that God exists. But of course, Bacon does say that God exists. He's certain, which would assume, we can assume from that at some point Francis Bacon met God in some form. Maybe not like a sit-down meeting and a cup of tea with a man with a white beard, but he certainly had experiences that told him that God exists, whether that's, standing in the church and feeling the power of the Spirit of Christ, or I don't know, going out in nature and seeing God's fingerprints all around us in the patterns and the way the plants grow or the way that the water moves. That's where he's getting his knowledge from. So for him, philosophy is massively important, but it can only go so far. You cannot have pure, rational, logical arguments. You have to experience things for them to be true. Clement Gilly, but depth in philosophy bringeth men's about to pigman. No, there is no pigman. Poor Francis. Oh, do you reckon they called him Pig Boy when he was in school? Well, not in school, when he was home educated. Do you think his tutors came in and said, hey, Pig Boy, do some more maths? I don't think they did. I think people back there were far more polite and they weren't so silly about people's names. The chat disagrees with me. Is that right, Magnus? I don't know why you'd want to do that. Either of those things. You wouldn't want to do the first step and you wouldn't want to do the consequences either. Mr. Piggy. Do you think that's what they called him when they were being polite? Harsh. So they call him the father of empiricism, or at least some do, Empiricism has got an enemy, right? There's an opposite. It's called rationalism. And these are two great schools of thought within philosophy. And, well, because they call him the father of empiricism, Francis Bacon was one of the leading sort of thoughts on empiricism. He's one of the guys that really sort of cements that philosophy. So we've got the differences here that I found nicely presented for us. So empiricism is knowledge based on experience and experimentation. Yeah. So that would fit with inductive reasoning, wouldn't it? Inductive reasoning is based on us seeing a thing and then going and looking for patterns. That would be our experience is where it starts. And then our experimentation would be looking for those patterns, which would then lead us to conclusions. Rationalism, on the other hand, means that knowledge is all based on the use of reason or logic. We can bring in other philosophers that we've talked about in the past. Descartes would be the prime example of a rationalist philosopher. René Descartes, he says, we cannot trust our senses. Of course we can't. I've got a candle with a flame and it's burning. And then eventually I come back and there's a puddle of liquid. What's that all about? And then, when that's dried a little bit, I can squish it in my hands and I can change its shape, this sort of sticky wax, you know. My senses are useless because I'm looking at a candle in 3 different states. You know, we could use the same example of water, ice, and steam. You know, how can it be the same thing when we're experiencing it so differently? Certainly there needs to be logic underpinning things. So for our rationalists, mathematics is the paradigm of knowledge. It is the, you know, that's the pure rationality is maths. You can't look at it in a funny way. You know, the concept of the number 2, for example, you can't sort of view that askance from a distance and it looks different and it acts differently. Whereas Descartes, again, he brings in this famous example of, you know, it's a rainy day and the rain is coming down and it's covering your window pane and it's all running down the window and everything's kind of misty and foggy. And you see this figure walking towards you. You're looking out the window, they're coming towards you, and you go, oh, there's Jeff. Hey, Jeff. Because your senses have told you that's Jeff right there. But then as the figure comes closer, you go, oh, actually, no, that wasn't Jeff at all. That was Brian. You know, it was just because my vision was obscured by the rain and the fog and all the patterns on the window, it looked a lot like Jeff. So empiricism would be wrong in that sense. But of course, empiricism says that experimental science is the paradigm of knowledge. We don't just sit and think about books and numbers and theories. We go out into the field. We collect up the witches and we test them. We look at the dogs and we count the fleas on them. That's, you know, empiricism. We're using our senses. Rationalism says that genuine knowledge is certain. Yeah, it's the stuff that is actually true. Whereas the empiricist would say that experience and experiment rarely, if ever, produce complete certainty. Yeah, David Hume is a good example here. David Hume saying, well, look, just because every day the sun rises, or every day so far in my life the sun has risen, doesn't mean necessarily it's going to rise the next day. Yeah, I mean, we have empirical truth up to a point, but it doesn't mean, just because we found a pattern, it doesn't mean that actually every instance of this is the same. Yeah, just because we've tested 68 million dogs and they've all got fleas, it doesn't mean that the next dog we test won't have fleas. So you never get that sort of that depth of certainty. Bacon would disagree with that perhaps, and he'd say, well, actually, that's where the certainty is coming from. Yeah, we find the patterns and we bring certain conclusions from it. Some empiricists believe that mathematics can be certain. Yeah, so you could be an empiricist and still believe that maths is true, but not all. You know, some empiricists would say, well, actually, that's not true either. But, you know, since Bacon wasn't so focused on maths, we won't worry about that right now. Whereas rationalism, on the other hand, when they think of experience, they say that experience does not produce certainty and does not conform to reason. We can see things with our eyes, we can touch things, and actually they're lies. Yeah, I mean, particularly in the modern world. You know, I can go online and I can find a video of, you know, completely lifelike and accurate video of Donald Trump, you know, doing the Macarena and singing a silly song about sausages, because we have the technology nowadays to be able to create that. It's not true. You know, I can look at the front of a magazine and see a model with beautiful, perfect skin. That's not true. That's just all they've airbrushed out all the spots and the wrinkles and the, you know, blemishes. So our own senses, particularly in the modern world, maybe they are not right. Yeah, yeah, airbrushing. It's not good. So the rationalist would say experience is at best second-class knowledge. That's not where Bacon is. Bacon says actually it's all down to that. Yeah, seeing is believing. That's what Bacon is trying to tell us. I don't know. Oh, if you were going to put yourself into a category, guys, would you say you're more like Bacon, the empiricist, you know, going out, finding the truth around us from what we see? Or are you more of a rationalist, somebody who, you know, is going to think things through from a logical point of view and maybe don't put so much faith in what they see? Seeing can be deceiving. That's true, Magnus. Yeah, but Bacon would say seeing is believing. Clem and Gilly are on Team Bacon. Nice. Yeah, they're empiricists. That's good. Amy's a bit of both. And that's probably, yeah. I mean, I think all rationalist philosophers need some, they need to make use of their senses at some point. And all empiricists, sometimes they have to make that logical leap and say, well, because I've observed, 50,000 of this example, then I'm going to come to a conclusion that probably the next one's going to be the same too. Yeah. Magnus, I'm not sure what that means. Shooting a cow. I'm not sure what side that puts you on. Anya's rationalist. Henry's rationalist too. Interesting. And I think, yeah, rationalism definitely has a place. Generally speaking, when people look at empiricism today, they go, oh, that's a bit cute. It's quite nice. Oh yeah, everything we see is real and that's what we base everything off. I think the modern world is quite rationalist in general. Yeah. So there we go. Poor old Bacon. He had a great career. He was rich, he was powerful, he got good jobs, he got good education at universities, he traveled Europe. But sadly, he became a cropper in the end because he fell out with King James, the successor to Elizabeth I, which is kind of interesting because, of course, King James went on to have the Charlies. I know. He ended up being put up on charges of 26 counts of corruption and illegal activity. He was sacked from all his jobs. He very nearly had his titles and land taken away from him, but he didn't. And so he ended up having to live on his own, quite poor, with no respect. And I don't know how that fits with his empiricism. Maybe he would have argued in court when they were accusing him of corruption. Maybe he'd have said, look for the empirical evidence. There is none. I'm a good guy. Look, I've been good for all my life. I must now therefore be good now. That's inductive reasoning. But maybe the judge thought, well, actually, we'll look at this from a more rationalist position and we'll come to the conclusion, my hypothesis is that you're a crook and therefore we're going to treat you like one. I don't know. Maybe that's how it went down in his philosophical brain. All right. So Bacon, an interesting fella. I mean, maybe not because of his life. I mean, his historical life does have interest, I suppose. But I find him more interesting on that sort of the idea of where knowledge comes from, his epistemology. And I think, he deserves the title of father of empiricism. But maybe empiricism has some problems. Maybe that's where we can leave that. You thought he would have had his head chopped. No, he was a naughty boy, perhaps, although we can't tell now whether he actually had been involved in crime and corruption. But yeah, one way or the other, they got him for it. So I don't know. I can't comment on how, he said he was innocent and the other said he wasn't. So I don't know. It's we would actually need to be there, according to Francis Bacon's own rules, to find out whether he was a crook or not. We would have to go and find out empirically. We couldn't sit back here, 400 years later and use logic to work it out. It's only illegal if you're caught. Magnus, that is not good philosophy. That's naughty. Anya says he seems a bit sketchy. Wow, poor old Bacon. All I've managed to do today is get everyone to mock his name and think that he's sketchy. Oh, well, I'll have to try harder next time. All right. Thank you very much, guys. It was wonderful to see you all. And I'll be back in a couple of weeks with a big idea. Magnus, there is no Geneva in space. Goodbye.